this one, Genesis 29, the dramatic birth of a kingdom. And what we're going to read today is arguably one of the most dramatic love stories ever told, next to, I would say, the Song of Solomon. And it's a story about Rachel and Jacob. Many of you have probably heard this story, maybe in Sunday school or whatever. But, it's unfortunate that many, if we had more good people in Hollywood, they could take a chapter like this and make a #1 hit movie, a blockbuster movie. Because in this chapter, it has every element that makes a story very exciting. It's got suspense, it's got betrayal, it's got all these different elements that keep people hanging on and wanting more. But unfortunately, we don't have that many. We've got Mel Gibson and a few others in there. Mel Gibson's kind of, he's made some good movies, but in his personal life, he's not quite stable all the time. So it would be nice if we had some good people to make some good movies, but we don't get that. But you know what? This is more than just a love story. It is a history of a man whom God chose to establish his kingdom on earth. It all begins with this family. In the beginning of this chapter, we're going to see Jacob traveling a long distance to find a wife from his own kindred. And in this process, he's going to meet up with Laban, his uncle, and through Laban's connivery, trickery, and God's overseeing providence, Jacob ends up with 2 wives and 2 concubines that will produce for him all of the children that will be the foundation of God's chosen nation, the 12 tribes of Israel. And I'll say this, and like all other historical accounts in the Bible, there are always hidden truths veiled within these simple to read stories. They're always there. In fact, Jesus oftentimes would tell his disciples or somebody, "Have you not read?" And he'll quote back from a simple story. The Apostle Paul, from these kinds of stories here. So there's more than meets the eye. And perhaps you guys, as you're reading through this with me, you'll see some of those beautiful truths hidden underneath the surface of the pages. All right, let's get into it. Genesis chapter 29, verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. Okay, this what Jacob did is he traveled basically northeast from the land of Canaan. And many scholars believe this was about a 15-day journey into the area known today as Turkey. So it was a long journey, 15 days traveling, I think it was like approximately maybe 50 miles a day on foot to find this wife. Remember, he could have just married one of the daughters of Canaan or an Ishmaelite like Esau did. But they weren't the right women, okay? They weren't the right women to build this kingdom. Genesis chapter 29, verse 2. And we think about that as far as our young men and our young women is to find, if you're going to build a little mini kingdom, so to speak, every family is like a little mini kingdom. You need to find the right partner. It needs to be a good Christian man or a woman. Anyways, verse 2. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flock, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. Now, whenever you see something like 3 flocks of sheep or something like that, usually there's a deeper message in there that God's trying to give us. We know sheep are often represent the children of God, and so forth. And this well symbolizes the waters of truth that feed the sheep or the people of God. So why these 3 let me see here. Okay. Notice there was a great stone that covered the mouth. We're going to be talking about that in a second. Verse 3, and thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep and put again upon the well's mouth in his place. So I assume they were putting this large stone upon this well to guard it, to keep the waters clean, to keep anybody from contaminating it, and so on. But I can't help but think, and I'm just kind of planting some seeds for you as that may grow for you today or some other day. But I can't help but think when we're talking about sheep, we're talking about the well of water, and we're talking about this great stone. I can't help but think about many things that involve the life of Jesus. You know, Jesus, over Jesus' tomb, there was that great stone that the angels rolled out. So after he resurrected, he escaped the tomb, if you would, or escaped death. So there are some interesting parallels here. And one I could say is, without the wells of the waters of truth that come from Jesus and his resurrection, we have no life. In Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus was tempted of the devil to make these stones into bread, Satan came up to him and said, hey, if you're really the Son of God, make these stones into bread. And Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That's every word, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. He didn't say take a few crumbs here and there and that's how you sustain yourself. It's the entire word. And anyways, let's get on to the next verse here. Verse 4, and Jacob said unto them, my brethren, whence be ye? And they said, of Haran are we. Okay, Haran is where modern day Turkey is today. And Jacob was coming from where modern day the modern day nation of Israel, or the Israeli nation is today. Not necessarily a connection with the modern day Israeli nation and the tribes of Israel, as a side note. But anyways, verse 5. And he said unto them, know you Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. Now Laban was Jacob's uncle. Laban's sister, Rebekah, was Jacob's mother. All right. So he's asking, do you know where my uncle is? Do you know who he is? All right. Verse 6. And he said unto them, is he well? And they said, did I skip a verse? Because they said, we know him. All right. Sorry. Verse 6. And he said unto them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, cometh with the sheep. All right. Jackpot. All right. She's in the picture now. Rachel's on her way. And not only, what's interesting about all these biblical characters, they're always, doing something proactive. They're not just sitting there, in the queen's chamber or something like that. Even both the men and the women are doing something active and productive. And here, in this instance, it's Rachel is actually taking care of these sheep. This was a hard job. She had to gather all these sheep to the well to get their water. All right, verse 7. And he said, lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water you the sheep and go and feed them. So Jacob's having a discussion with these other guys at the well. They were probably more young boys. It was either usually young boys or women that would bring the sheep to the watering to the wells to get water. So he's talking to these guys. He's asking them about if they know who Laban is, and now he's talking to them about the time that the cattle should feed, and he's telling. And then in verse 8 he says, and they said, we cannot until the flocks be gathered together, till they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. So there was this rule there that they had, was everybody had to basically line up first, then probably some bigger, older men would come and move this stone off the well and then water. They had a timed system here going, whatever you want to call it, a system of watering the sheep and the other animals. And they're explaining this to Jacob, all right? It's kind of interesting what Jacob's going to do here in a second. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Now I'm going to back up a little bit as a spiritual type. There was a time that Jesus said, I must go to the Father before the Holy Spirit can be poured out upon you. And he says, don't touch. Remember he was talking to one of the, I think it was Mary, one of the Marys. Oh, don't touch me. What he meant is don't hold me up. And the Holy Spirit can't come until I go to the Father. Now what's interesting is these sheep could not be watered until the stone was removed from the well. Well, the sheep, God's sheep could not be watered with the Holy Spirit until that tomb was removed from, or the great stone was removed from Jesus' tomb, and Jesus ascended to the Father. So, very interesting parallels here. But anyways, all right, verse 10. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, it's actually his first cousin. Believe it or not, you can actually still marry your first cousin today in I think it's 13 or 14 different states in the United States. I didn't know that. I happened to look that up the other day out of curiosity. And some states have restrictions. Well, if there's any health issues or something in the genes, then they can't. And so every state varies a little bit. I'm not suggesting that you do, but back here it was okay. You couldn't marry your full sister, I know that, but later on God gave specific commands of who you could marry, and I don't think the first cousins were ever outlawed in that command under the law of Moses. So, anyways, and it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So Jacob totally broke the system. They said, oh, we can't do it till everybody's lined up and at the proper time. Jacob just went over there probably excited to see her, maybe even wanted to show off a little bit, show off his strength. He was no doubt a pretty strong guy. Just went and rolled that stone off for her and helped her water the sheep. So if people don't change all that much today. Well, now today, this would be a bad thing to do. Oh, you don't want to show macho, you don't want to be a macho man now. That's sexist. That's not acceptable. But you know what? I think real godly women like godly men to be not effeminate men. Today, now, unfortunately, we're seeing a whole crop of men coming up that are bred to be effeminate, soft, faithless cowards. And Jacob was none of those. He didn't care about this rule. And it was interesting. Some of you might relate to this. Sometimes rules that people make are kind of stupid and they don't make sense. And sometimes you just got to break the rule to get the job done. And Jacob obviously had this mentality that this is silly. Let's just feed these flocks and get it done with instead of following this to the letter of the law, so to speak. All right. But anyways, and Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. So, this must have been kind of surprising for her. He goes and rolls this stone out. Now he's crying, This isn't an effeminate cry. This is a cry for joy. He's very happy. But think about this. There's more to this. Not only is he excited because he just met the beautiful girl of his dreams, but he's also excited because he had been living as a stranger in the land of Canaan, away from his kinsfolk, away from his family. So all he saw was these Canaanite women, these women that were probably like what you'd say today, the worldly type women. And here he goes and sees this shepherd girl who's beautiful and a diligent woman, and he's very attracted to her. So again, living among the Canaanites and now getting to finally see his own kindred. And I think this might have been the only time in his life that he actually, besides his immediate family, Abraham's immediate family, that he had ever met his kinsfolk. Okay? So this was an exciting time. I'm just trying to explain why he was crying. He was very excited for a number of reasons. Verse 12, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. So she didn't walk, she ran. She was excited too, obviously, that there's this Jacob guy that she didn't know about. Verse 13, and it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him. He's running too. Everybody's excited. And kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. So he's catching up with his long-lost relative. They're having their stories. They're excited. We're kinsfolk. And verse 14, and Laban said to him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. So Laban, we're going to find out he was kind of a shady character, but he wasn't all that bad. He wasn't bad. It's just like people today. People have good traits and bad traits. The good trait of Laban is that he loved Jacob because he was family, and he wanted to take care of him. And the bad we'll see later on. But here he says, bone of my flesh. This reminds me of the statement made in Genesis chapter 2, I believe it was, where God took woman out of man and he said, then Adam said, this is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones, or something like that. Almost quoting this verbatim here. So I just thought that was neat there. All right, family ties are important. Verse 15, and Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou serve with me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? Now, this is after he had already been there a month, okay? He had been working for him. This isn't like they're having this conversation here and all of a sudden they're still talking. They had their talking. Jacob settled in with him and he stayed with him for a month, but Jacob just didn't stay there and kick up his feet and look at the stars. While he was there, he was helping Laban with his work. And no doubt this is Jacob's work ethic has impressed Laban, as we're going to see here in a little bit. Well, we know right now it's impressed him enough to where now he wants to hire him. He wants to keep him on and pay him because this Jacob guy is helping his production of whatever it was that he was doing, farming, animals, sheep, you name it. All right, so there's a lesson for that to us. A personal lesson is always be hardworking in all that we do, no matter if we're getting paid or not. If we're doing something, put our whole heart into it, and there will be more opportunities. Now he's got an opportunity. Now think about this. Jacob would have never had this opportunity to maybe marry Rachel, as we're going to get into in a little bit, had he not served with Laban for a month and worked hard and gained credibility with him. So the more than a financial opportunity, opportunity of his lifetime just opened up because he was a diligent, hardworking man. All right, verse 16. And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Now, Leah means basically in the Hebrew it says her name meant tender-eyed. But I think it meant she was weak on the eyes is really what it means, carries forth in Hebrew. She was weak on the eyes, whereas Rebekah was strong on the eyes. She was very attractive. In other words, Leah was less attractive than Rachel. Okay? And who's Jacob going to go after naturally here? Leah or Rachel? Unfortunately, things never change. So I should say unfortunately, but it's just the way it happens. Is he's gonna want the more beautiful sister here. Verse 17. I'm sorry, I could have read this and then explained that. But Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Okay, you can interpret beautiful and well-favored in however you want to, but she was a beautiful woman there. Okay, here we go. Verse 18, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve these 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Now back in these days, and we may think it sounds foreign, but in order to get a wife, you actually had to pay the father a dowry. You had to pay him a sum of money to acquire the right to marry his daughter. And Jacob didn't have any money. I mean, he just left. Remember, we had that big dramatic story happening where Jacob tricked Esau, or Jacob tricked Isaac and got the the birthright and the blessing. And now he's on the run from his mom told him to get out of here or else Esau's going to kill you. And so she says, get out of here and go find a wife. It was a good way to get him to save him from Esau and to get him to start his own family. So he had nothing with him. I mean, he had nothing to give Laban for the right to marry his daughter. So now he's coming up with a deal. I will serve you for 7 years for your daughter, Rachel. Okay, now think about this. Why not 2 years? Why not 3 years? Why not 4 years? It's interesting when you look at biblical time is actually always broken up into segments of 7, periods of 7. Well, for one, we got our week. Monday, well, we call it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 7 days in a week. But there were also, the bigger calendar would go, we always think of decades, but the primary biblical calendar counted every 7 years instead of decades. So this was probably a common segment of time that he was going by. 7 years was probably normal for a business contract of any sort. Anytime you did any agreement, it probably was a minimum of 7 years. Anyway, so I also say this, in the Bible, if you were an Israelite and you were destitute and you were poor, you could actually sell yourself into slavery for 7 years to somebody to work. Basically, it's not that much different than today. I mean, you go and work for an employer, you're serving them, But here they would make an agreement to serve that employer for 7 years. And there was a contract there. But at the end of 7 years, then if they sold themselves into slavery to get their financial condition back in order, then they were set free. The slave owner or the business owner couldn't just keep them there. An Israelite could not keep another Israelite as a slave for forever. They had to let him go. And it's not a bad thing as what we think of it as bad. It actually, when people are down on their luck, instead of giving them welfare or whatever, it gives them a chance to make something out of themselves, to actually keep their dignity because they're working and they're doing something rather than just taking handouts. Anyway, so Jacob was destitute. I mean, this is all he could do. All he had was his hard work ethic. He didn't have anything else as far as possessions go. If you remember his father, I'm kind of rambling on a little bit here, but you can remember it was a totally different story before. Remember Isaac? Abraham sent out his most trusted servant to find a wife for Isaac. That was Jacob's dad. Isaac didn't even go on the journey to find his own wife. Abraham kind of pampered Isaac a little bit and sent out a servant for him. And then that servant actually had all this money and paid the dowry and got Jacob's mom to go, Rebecca, to go back and marry Isaac, who was Jacob's father. So there's a big contrast here. My point is there's a big contrast. Isaac was kind of a rich boy. He inherited a lot of stuff. And Jacob here is kind of a man who has to now make his own way. Even though he does possess the blessings and the promises and the birthrights, at this time he doesn't possess those. Okay? All right, anyways. Verse 19, and Laban said, "It is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man abode with me." Now it's interesting, I think people say this today if somebody's got a friend or something and they got sons or daughters and say, "I'd rather have my son or daughter marry your son or daughter than marry some strange guy that I don't know," and stuff like that. I mean, so that's what Laban says. Hey, man, he probably doesn't want to give up his daughter necessarily. And I think a lot of dads probably, it's got to be a hard thing to give up their daughter, but at least if he's going to give her up to somebody, he'd give her up to this guy that has proved himself. Okay, verse 20. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. Okay, so every day he was working, no doubt. He probably had contact with her. He was probably talking to her, thinking about her, daydreaming about her. And it made the time go by really fast. Now, there are a lot of lessons in this, is that you can take on a personal level. time flies. Obviously, time flies when you're enjoying yourself, but also time flies when you have a stated goal that you're trying to reach. Now, if you just go to work every day and you have no purpose for that work, and it's just, oh, I'm just paying the bills, man, this is just another day paying the bills, just getting by, but no specific plan of where you're going to go in 2 months to a year to 7 years, then 7 years seems like 7 years or maybe more, and it's dreadful. But he knew what was at the end of 7 years. His prize was going to be his beautiful wife. So, I mean, it made time go by a lot faster. Again, work, it's always important to assign a purpose to our work. We always should have goals and know what we're doing with our work so that it's meaningful and it's not dreadful and boring and mundane and here we go again type of thing, okay? Or, like a lot of people just, they go to work and they look at the clock and they just keep looking at that clock. Oh, when am I going to be done? When am I going to be done? That's not what Jacob did. He worked hard and the time went by fast. Hard work is something that is a very a biblical thing. Okay, let me see here. Let's go on here. Okay, let's move on. Verse 21, and Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. All right, obviously, go in unto her is a euphemism for coming together as one flesh. He was pretty straightforward here. I mean, he had waited a long time. He's paid his dues, and now he was ready for the wedding night. And because he was so excited, it's going to probably do something to him. He's really excited about this. His mind probably isn't thinking all the way straight, and because he knows what's going to be coming on his wedding night, and Laban's going to take advantage of that. Here it is. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. So, when they made feasts like this, these wedding feasts, there was obviously, we know even from the New Testament that there was alcohol involved, there was wine, and there was a celebration. And I think part of this we're going to see here, I think Jacob was probably drinking a little wine, maybe a little bit more than he should have. And as we're going to see here, verse 23. And it came to pass in the evening that he, Laban, took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went in unto her. Now some would say, how could that happen? Well, they didn't have electricity back in those days. There was a wedding feast going on. Jacob was probably drinking alcohol. Right now he's thinking one thing, and and he's not worried about the details. He's probably not talking to her, oh, hey, are you really Rachel? No, he's probably just ready to do what he's supposed to do. And so it was dark, and back in these days, the women wore veils, especially on the wedding day. So it would have been a relatively easy feat for Laban to pull off, to trick him and give him his other daughter, Leah, instead of Rachel. All right? And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. So a lot of times these Laban was a wealthy guy. A lot of times these wealthy guys, they would actually give their daughters a servant to accompany them, to help them take care of the children, people do this. Rich people have these today. I mean, they're called nannies and stuff like that, right? It was basically like her nanny to help out with childbirth and things like that. Okay, verse 25, and it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? So he didn't even know. That's why I say he was probably drinking a little bit extra wine. And it was dark, and it wasn't until the lights came on in the morning that he's like, this is not Rachel. Quite a surprise this must have been, and he must have been pretty upset. The woman of his dreams, the woman he was working for 7 years, is not his wife in the morning that he expected. Okay, so he's obviously, he's mad at Laban. He's saying, why did you deceive me? Now check out Laban's response. And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So now this, I did a bunch of research on this. It sounds like he was really stretching the truth here. This was probably just a fabrication. You know how people are today, con men and con artists. And Laban was kind of a con man, kind of a con artist. He just came up with an excuse. Well, it's not customary for us to give our younger before the older, so that's why I had to do this. I'm just following the normal tradition here. And obviously he wasn't. It was just an excuse. All right, let's check this out. Verse 27, he says, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me, yet 7 other years. So now Laban says, okay, you can still have Rachel, but you got to serve with me 7 more years. But he was going to give him Rachel right away. He wasn't going to have to wait 7 more years. But he had to fulfill his week of marriage festivities with Leah first. He couldn't just say, okay, I'm done with Leah, now I'm moving on to Rachel right away. There was a whole week process, and so on. Verse 28, and now what I want to bring up here is, before we get into this, is God oftentimes uses certain people to make his will come to pass. Now, Laban, no doubt God was using Laban's craftiness to help, Jacob. I'm trying to word this right. But he's setting Jacob up for for his family to grow and produce many children. He's going to end up having the 12 tribes. This could happen through one woman. It could, but for whatever reason, it seemed like they didn't have 12 children back then. It seemed like it was usually, at least in Jacob's family, it was they were lucky to have one for whatever reason. So I don't know the reason, but whatever reason, God was still overseeing this, and it was part of his plan. I know we think of Genesis chapter 1, that marriage should be between one man and one woman. And why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow Jacob to have 2 wives, and then we're going to find out later 2 concubines? I don't know all the answers to that, but I think there are some in-depth answers to that I haven't completely uncovered yet. I might share a little bit of tidbits on that as we go through. But anyways, and Jacob did so and fulfilled her week and gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved, now check this out, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. So obviously Rachel here is his favorite wife, not because he's got 2 now. Now think about this. The reason why I bring this up, I think God oftentimes orchestrates unconventional things to happen to teach deeper spiritual truths. Does God have a favorite, or I'll put it this way, does Jesus have a favorite wife and a lesser favorite wife? Well, we know in the Bible, when you read through the scriptures, God and Jesus have what are called his elect bride, his chosen bride, a special bride. For whatever reason, she's more beautiful spiritually, she's more abundant spiritually, and he has other spiritual brides that are still his bride, kind of like Leah, but they're just not quite as vivacious, not quite as beautiful in the spiritual sense. So if you look at Revelation chapter 14, or Revelation 7 and Revelation 14, you'll find there's this group called the 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe. And they were called the bride of Christ, or the wife of Christ. And they were special and set aside from all these other people that were believers in Revelation 7, that were, in a sense, I guess you could say, the lesser wife, the wife that's not as beautifully spiritually speaking. So I think that's why we're weaving in this multiple wife thing, is so God can teach us something about his emotions and his feelings and deeper things about his plan. It's amazing when you start digging into the Bible and you look, like I said, some of these simple stories, they will tell some of the most profound, deep truths that you couldn't have ever even imagined that we're here. And that I'm just kind of planting a little seed there. You'll have to do more of your own work to uncover what you would there. And that's why you see the 7 years. That's why you see the 7-year period mentioned there. That's why you see the stone before the well. That's why there's these flocks of sheep. God is trying to bring us into this deeper understanding of the love He has for His bride, and why He loves her so much. Okay? And there's another thing. If you've been a student of the Bible for any length of time, you remember there was a couple of Jesus' teachings where He says the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Well, Leah was the first, but now she's last in Jacob's eyes, whereas Rachel was last in birth, but first in his eyes. And so Jesus connects that to this. In another place, even when He made wine for a wedding, Jesus' first miracle, He made a point of saying that he made the wine, He made the best wine last. When Jesus made that wine, He made the best wine last, and the worst wine was first. Now, in normal conditions at a wedding, they would give the best wine first because people were sober and they could taste the wine better, their taste buds, and then they'd put out the cheap stuff later on because it didn't matter. But the point is there's a connection here between Rachel and Leah and some deeper spiritual truths of God and His spiritual bride. Okay? All right, moving on. So yes, Jesus does have a special favorite wife. So, and if you just look up the word if you got a Bible dictionary, look up the word elect or chosen, and you'll see it all over the place. Genesis chapter 29, verse 31, and when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, or loved less is actually what it means. He didn't hate her. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So it's fascinating here. God is actually, you can see here, at least in this instance, God is in control of opening and closing wombs. God is in charge of when babies are born and when they're not. Like I said, especially in this instance, because this is about, remember, what we're reading about here is the title of the study. The title of the study was the birth of a dramatic birth of a kingdom. And you can see all these different things happening, this trickery, this connivery. This is all part of a dramatic birth of God's kingdom here on earth. Without this chapter that we're reading right now, there would be no Christianity. Because if Jacob had not fallen in love with Rachel, and then in turn Laban tricking Jacob to marry Leah, there would be Jesus would have never been born through that line. Because Jesus was actually born, believe it or not, through Leah's line. Through Leah's line, as we're going to find out here. So there was a purpose for Leah to come in the mix. And Laban had no idea, but God was orchestrating this whole thing. Okay, so and the Lord saw that Leah was hated, and He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So God is actually doing Leah a favor because Jacob loved Rachel more. Now He's making it so Jacob's got to spend a little bit more attention to Leah, because now she's having the children, but Rachel's not. Check this out, verse 32. And Leah conceived and bare a son. We know it wasn't, Jacob probably didn't only go in the tent one time. He did go back in again here. It was his wife. I know, it's just human nature, I guess, here. But verse 32. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Now that I have his son. Now Leah, think about Leah. You got to have a little empathy for Leah here. She was not the most beautiful of the daughters. Her husband didn't love her as much as he loved her sister. And this was her way of trying to acquire his love and attention. And she's thinking, now he's going to really love me because I got a baby for him. And she conceived again. Okay, so here we go. And bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated or loved less, He hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. She called his name Simeon. Now remember, this is the birth of God's kingdom on earth here. These 12 tribes. These are members of the 12 tribes. Verse 34, and she conceived again. Okay, and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because this is her whole purpose, just wanting her husband's attention, wanting her husband's affection. It's a good lesson for us guys, is women want our affection and our time. Okay, so now this time my husband will be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name shall be called Levi. And Levi, actually, his name means the joiner. So these boys are named, to fit the story here. Verse 35, and she conceived again and bare a son. This is a lot of children for a wife that Jacob loved less. All right. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. Now remember, Jesus came through Judah. Judah is Leah's son. So had not Laban done all this trickery to Jacob, we wouldn't have the birth line of Jesus Christ himself. So again, there's a purpose for all this stuff that seems a little strange to us. But the more and more you get into the Bible, the more you understand some of these strange things, and the more you can piece them together and they make sense. But anyways, so she's praising. Not only is she excited about her husband now spending more time with her, now she's praising the Lord for the children that she has. So she's a godly woman. She's recognizing that these children are coming from God. Oops, that was the last verse. And she conceived again, okay, and it ends with Judah. And it's interesting that it ends with Judah because, like I said, that's the line that Jesus, the Savior of the world, came through. So 4 children to 0. Leah has 4, right? This is 4, not 5 yet. Okay, Leah has 4 and Rachel has 0. And so, like I said, this would make a very good Hollywood movie. Everything is the opposite of what you'd expect going on. It would just be, they could really do a lot with this. But anyways, in conclusion, we just read here in this chapter the beginning of of a dramatic love story that gave birth to the most significant nation on earth. This stuff wasn't just happenstance. God was orchestrating all this. Later on, this nation, called the nation of Israel, would later grow into a company of nations that we talked about last week, that we call today Western Christian civilization. That basically was Christian Europe and the United States of America. And of course, Europe has gotten really away from God and so forth. But nevertheless, that's what happened. These children of Leah aren't just any old children. Their names, now think about this, their names will be placed on the gates of the eternal city, the headquarters of heaven on earth, New Jerusalem. And you can find that actually on the gates. I don't know if I said that. Their names are going to be placed on the gates of heaven itself, heaven on earth. Think about that. And you can find that in Revelation chapter 21, verse 12. And it all started here in this chapter with Jacob's strong desire and attraction for Rachel. All this became possible. Now think about that. Every blessing that God has given has started with an attraction between a man and a woman. And that combination, boom, produces fruit. And it produces children, it produces nations. Without that connection, there's nothing, right? And today, why we, some people think we talk about the LGBTQ movement too much. Well, number one, they're attacking us. Number two, it goes against the very foundation of everything in its natural order. Because without a strong attraction between a man and a woman, you have nothing. You've got nothing of any value whatsoever. You got confusion, you got chaos, and you got destruction. And here we have this beginning. It started out dramatic. It was, but it's gonna in the long run, it's gonna be a great thing that has happened here. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I just made a note that how real God is. It's, that in the situation where Rebecca? No, what was it? Rachel. Yeah, she was more beautiful and all that. And who knows, she probably had some pride. She probably thought she was better than Leah or whatever, who knows, but you can just assume that, because why would God, you know, in a sense, punish her, kind of? You know, she didn't do anything wrong, as we can, not that we can tell anyway, but there must have been something more going on. But it's just interesting that God even is just so personal with us that he says, he realizes Leah's struggling maybe with her beauty, with not being loved, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna bless you. You know, she's probably more of a godly woman, it appears to be, but I just think God is really personal with each one of us, you know.
Yeah.
We have weaknesses or things that we're down about or whatever, and if we just stay right with God, he's going to find a way to use that weakness to, you know, help others or do amazing things.
That's a great point. Yeah, he cares about the little things. That, like you said, yeah, that's and maybe he was Rachel had to be humbled a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because now, I mean, God humbles all of us throughout our lives. If we're away from him, and he's going to use us to any extent, there's going to be periods where he's going to humble us, and otherwise our pride would just bring us down different paths. So yeah, that's a good point. Everybody, in the long run, God's like painting this, or you could say painting a picture or crafting something just perfect. He's making all these different things happen that seem almost kind of confusing, like a mess is happening, but he's in control, knowing exactly what's going on each step of the way. And all the lessons are being learned, everything that everybody needs. It's amazing.
Christian Overcomers is brought to you by the tithes and offerings of our listeners. If you would like to support our ministry, please go to ChristianOvercomers.com. God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible sword. His truth is marching on.